How did ancient manage to fight a biggest epidemic? Think about waking up in a world where nobody understands what bacteria are. Nobody has ever seen a virus. There are no antibiotics, no vaccines, no modern hospitals, no laboratories, and no scientific explanation for why thousands of people suddenly become sick at the same time. Families watch their loved ones develop strange symptoms that seem to appear without warning. Entire villages become silent within weeks, and even the strongest warriors, kings, priests, and merchants cannot escape the invisible enemy. This was not a scene from a horror movie. This was reality for countless civilizations throughout ancient history. Yet despite having almost no scientific knowledge compared to today, ancient societies somehow found ways to survive some of the deadliest epidemics the world has ever known. Their methods were often based on observation, experience, tradition, religion, and sometimes pure instinct. But surprisingly, many of these strategies contained ideas that modern medicine would later prove to be remarkably effective. The story of how ancient people managed to fight massive epidemic diseases is one of humanity's greatest survival stories, and by the end of this journey, you may never look at history in the same way again. Throughout history, disease has shaped civilizations just as much as wars, kings, and empires. Entire kingdoms have disappeared not because they lost battles, but because invisible diseases destroyed their populations. Trade routes that connected continents also became highways for deadly infections. Every traveler, every merchant, every soldier, and every ship carried not only goods, but also microorganisms that nobody could see. While people feared invading armies, they often had no idea that a far more dangerous enemy was already among them. This invisible enemy did not negotiate, did not show mercy, and did not recognize borders. It attacked the rich and the poor, children and elders, rulers and ordinary citizens alike. One of the greatest misconceptions about ancient civilizations is the belief that they were completely helpless against epidemics. While it is true they lacked modern scientific technology, ancient people were far from ignorant. Human beings are natural observers. Over generations, communities noticed patterns that repeated themselves whenever disease appeared. They observed that people who stayed close to the sick often became sick themselves. They noticed that crowded cities experienced faster outbreaks than isolated villages. They realized that certain seasons seemed to bring more illness than others. Without microscopes, they slowly built practical knowledge based on careful observation, and this wisdom became the foundation of many survival strategies. Long before the word quarantine was ever invented, many ancient communities had already discovered the importance of separating sick individuals from healthy populations. Although they did not understand germs, they recognized that disease often spread through close contact. In many regions, families would isolate infected relatives in separate shelters or houses located away from the main settlement. Travelers arriving from distant lands were sometimes required to remain outside city walls until local leaders believed they posed no threat. These practices were not perfect, but they significantly reduced the speed at which epidemics spread through entire communities. It was one of humanity's earliest forms of public health. Ancient Egypt provides one of the earliest examples of organized health practices. The Egyptians placed enormous importance on cleanliness. Priests frequently bathed, washed their clothing, shaved body hair, and maintained strict personal hygiene during religious ceremonies. Many temples required purification rituals before allowing entry. While these practices were motivated by religious beliefs, they also reduced the spread of certain infectious diseases. Egyptian physicians recorded symptoms, observed patient conditions carefully, and documented treatments on papyrus scrolls. Their medical writings reveal a civilization that valued systematic observation long before the birth of modern science. The rivers that gave life to civilizations also presented dangerous health risks. Ancient people understood that contaminated water often brought sickness, even if they did not know exactly why. Many societies preferred flowing water over stagnant pools. Wells were protected whenever possible, and settlements often developed rules about where waste could be disposed of to prevent contamination of drinking sources. These simple practices helped reduce outbreaks of waterborne diseases that could otherwise devastate entire populations. Cleanliness became more than a personal habit, it became a community responsibility. Ancient cities invested enormous effort into removing waste from living areas. Some civilizations built surprisingly advanced drainage systems that carried wastewater away from homes. Streets were cleaned regularly in certain urban centers, and officials supervised sanitation efforts. Although these systems were primitive by modern standards, they represented an extraordinary understanding that healthy environments contributed to healthier populations. Among the most remarkable examples comes from the civilization of the Indus Valley, where cities were carefully planned with sophisticated drainage networks, brick-lined streets, covered sewers, and household bathing areas. Thousands of years before many other civilizations developed similar infrastructure, these cities demonstrated an advanced appreciation for sanitation and urban planning. Historians continue to admire how seriously these ancient engineers considered public health within city design. Ancient Greece introduced another important idea that continues to influence medicine today. Greek physicians emphasized careful observation rather than relying entirely on superstition. They encouraged studying symptoms, comparing patients, documenting outcomes, and searching for natural explanations whenever possible. While many of their theories were scientifically incorrect, their commitment to observation laid important foundations for future medical progress. Instead of assuming every illness was simply divine punishment, some Greek thinkers argued that environmental conditions, diet, climate, and lifestyle played significant roles in human health. Food also became an important weapon against disease. Ancient civilizations understood that weak and malnourished individuals often became ill more easily than healthy people. Although they could not explain nutrition scientifically, they recognized the importance of balanced diets whenever resources allowed. Communities stored grain, dried fruits, herbs, honey, fermented foods, and medicinal plants to help people recover during difficult periods. Honey, in particular, was widely valued because it helped protect wounds from infection. Modern research has shown that honey possesses natural antibacterial properties, proving that some ancient practices were far more effective than their users could have imagined. Herbal medicine formed another essential pillar of ancient healthcare. Across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, healers spent generations studying plants and their effects on the human body. Every region developed extensive knowledge of local herbs used to reduce fever, relieve pain, clean wounds, ease breathing problems, and strengthen weakened patients. This knowledge was preserved through oral traditions, handwritten manuscripts, apprenticeships, and family lineages. While not every remedy worked, many medicinal plants used in ancient times later became the basis for modern pharmaceuticals. Religion also played an enormous role during epidemics. In many civilizations, disease was believed to reflect spiritual imbalance, divine anger, or supernatural forces. People gathered for prayers, rituals, sacrifices, and ceremonies seeking protection. While modern science explains disease differently, these religious gatherings provided something equally valuable during times of crisis: hope. Fear can destroy communities as effectively as disease itself. Shared beliefs gave people emotional strength, encouraged cooperation, reduced panic, and helped maintain social order when everything else seemed uncertain. Community cooperation often determined whether entire settlements survived. During severe outbreaks, healthy individuals cared for vulnerable neighbors, distributed food, buried the dead with dignity, and supported orphaned children. Leaders organized supplies, monitored food storage, maintained security, and attempted to preserve daily life, despite overwhelming losses. Epidemics tested not only medical knowledge, but also compassion, courage, and social responsibility. Communities that worked together frequently recovered faster than those torn apart by fear and mistrust. Trade, however, remained both a blessing and a curse. Ancient trade networks connected distant civilizations, allowing ideas, technology, culture, and wealth to spread across continents. Unfortunately, these same routes also transported deadly pathogens. Merchants unknowingly carried diseases into cities that had never encountered them before. Ports became especially vulnerable because ships arriving from foreign lands introduced unfamiliar illnesses. Over time, rulers recognized these dangers and began implementing early inspection measures for travelers and goods entering major commercial centers. Military campaigns often accelerated epidemics as well. Large armies lived in crowded camps where poor sanitation, contaminated water, limited food supplies, and constant movement created perfect conditions for disease transmission. In many historical conflicts, illness killed more soldiers than actual combat. Commanders gradually realized that maintaining cleaner camps, protecting water supplies, and separating sick troops improved survival rates. Although they lacked scientific explanations, experience repeatedly taught them valuable lessons. Perhaps the greatest strength of ancient civilizations was their willingness to learn from repeated disasters. Every epidemic became a harsh teacher. Communities remembered which practices seemed helpful and which proved disastrous. Knowledge accumulated across generations, allowing future societies to respond more effectively than their ancestors had. This slow process of learning through observation became one of humanity's greatest survival tools. As we continue exploring this incredible story, we will discover even more astonishing methods that ancient civilizations developed to confront deadly epidemics. Some of these strategies would influence medieval medicine, inspire future public health systems, and even resemble techniques still recommended by health experts today. The deeper we travel into history, the more we realize that the battle against epidemic disease did not begin with modern hospitals. It began thousands of years ago with ordinary people refusing to surrender to an invisible enemy they could not even see. As centuries passed, one powerful truth became impossible to ignore. Epidemics were not isolated events that happened only once in history. They returned again and again, sometimes after decades of peace, reminding every civilization that survival required constant vigilance. Ancient societies learned that forgetting the lessons of the past could cost thousands of lives. Every generation inherited not only stories of great kings and famous battles, but also warnings about invisible enemies that had devastated entire populations before. One of the greatest examples of this came during outbreaks that swept across the ancient Mediterranean world. Cities filled with merchants, travelers, soldiers, and pilgrims became perfect environments for disease transmission. Crowded marketplaces, narrow streets, shared water sources, and poor ventilation allowed illnesses to spread at astonishing speed. Yet these tragedies also forced governments to become more organized than ever before. Leaders realized that protecting public health was not simply a personal responsibility, but a duty of the entire state. Ancient administrators began paying closer attention to sanitation, food distribution, and the movement of people during times of crisis. Markets were sometimes restricted, public gatherings became less frequent, and officials monitored unusual patterns of illness. Even though these responses varied from one civilization to another, they reflected a growing understanding that epidemics required collective action rather than individual effort alone. Communication also became an unexpected weapon against disease. Long before newspapers, radio, television, or the internet existed, information traveled through travelers, traders, priests, scholars, government messengers, and local elders. Communities warned neighboring villages about dangerous outbreaks. Families shared practical advice that had protected previous generations. Knowledge moved from one region to another, sometimes more slowly than disease itself, but often quickly enough to save lives. Ancient physicians occupied one of the most difficult positions in society. Every day they faced illnesses they could not fully understand and diseases they often could not cure. Despite these limitations, many continued observing patients carefully, recording symptoms, comparing treatments, and improving their methods little by little. Their willingness to learn from failure became one of history's greatest scientific traditions. Progress did not happen overnight. It happened patient by patient, observation by observation, generation after generation. Many healers understood something that remains true even today. Not every treatment succeeds, but every patient teaches something valuable. This mindset transformed medicine from simple tradition into a continuous search for better answers. It was the beginning of evidence built through experience, even if scientific experiments as we know them today had not yet been developed. Another remarkable survival strategy involved caring for survivors after epidemics ended. Ancient communities recognized that recovery did not stop when symptoms disappeared. Families rebuilt homes, restored farms, replanted crops, reopened markets, and cared for orphaned children. Emotional wounds often lasted longer than physical illness. Entire generations carried memories of loved ones lost during epidemics, yet they chose to rebuild instead of surrendering to despair. These recoveries demonstrated an extraordinary characteristic of humanity: resilience. Time after time, civilizations suffered devastating losses, yet they continued creating art, building cities, developing technology, writing literature, and expanding knowledge. Epidemics slowed progress, but they never permanently defeated human determination. Historians often describe disease as one of history's greatest architects because epidemics changed far more than health. They influenced politics, economics, religion, migration, military campaigns, architecture, and even philosophy. Some empires weakened because their populations declined dramatically. Others emerged stronger after learning valuable lessons about organization, sanitation, and public administration. Disease quietly shaped the course of civilization in ways many people never realize. Ancient builders even adapted their environments based on previous experiences. Better ventilation, improved drainage, cleaner water systems, wider streets in some settlements, and more organized waste disposal gradually became priorities in many growing cities. Although these improvements were not perfect, they reflected humanity's remarkable ability to transform tragedy into practical knowledge. The role of education became increasingly important as well. Elders passed survival knowledge to younger generations through stories, traditions, practical demonstrations, and written records wherever literacy existed. Children learned which water sources were safest, which foods spoiled quickly, how to recognize dangerous symptoms, and why cleanliness mattered. This transfer of knowledge ensured that lessons purchased with enormous sacrifice would not simply disappear. Looking across different civilizations, one surprising pattern appears repeatedly. Whether in Africa, Asia, Europe, or the ancient Middle East, communities that valued cooperation generally survived epidemics more successfully than communities divided by fear and distrust. Fear encouraged selfishness, panic, and social breakdown. Cooperation encouraged food sharing, caregiving, sanitation, and organized responses that reduced suffering. This lesson remains deeply relevant today. Modern medicine possesses technologies that ancient civilizations could never have imagined. Scientists can identify viruses using advanced laboratories. Doctors perform life-saving surgeries. Vaccines protect billions of people. Antibiotics treat many bacterial infections. Hospitals use sophisticated equipment that represents centuries of medical progress. Yet despite these extraordinary advances, the most powerful defense against epidemics still includes many principles our ancestors discovered through observation. Hygiene, clean water, responsible behavior, protecting vulnerable people, sharing reliable information, and working together. History reminds us that technology alone is never enough. Human behavior matters just as much. A society with advanced medicine but poor cooperation can still struggle during a health crisis. Likewise, communities with limited technology but strong organization, discipline, and mutual support often demonstrate remarkable resilience. Perhaps the most inspiring lesson from ancient epidemics is that hope survived even when knowledge was incomplete. Imagine confronting a deadly disease without understanding what caused it, without modern treatment, without scientific certainty, and without guarantees that tomorrow would be better. Yet generation after generation refused to give up. They buried their dead with dignity. They cared for strangers. They protected children. They rebuilt communities. They searched for better solutions, even after repeated failures. Every modern hospital stands upon foundations built by countless unnamed healers who lived thousands of years ago. Every sanitation system reflects lessons learned through centuries of painful experience. Every public health campaign carries echoes of ancient communities that first realized the importance of isolation, cleanliness, observation, and cooperation. Humanity's medical journey did not begin in a modern laboratory. It began with ordinary people paying attention to the world around them and refusing to stop learning. When we study ancient epidemics, we are not simply studying disease. We are studying courage. We are studying adaptation. We are studying the extraordinary ability of human beings to face overwhelming challenges and continue moving forward. The greatest victory was never eliminating every disease, because that has never been possible. The greatest victory was preserving civilization itself. Today, when we wash our hands, drink clean water, receive medical treatment, or benefit from public health systems, we are unknowingly continuing a story that began thousands of years ago. The sacrifices of ancient generations helped shape the safer world we now enjoy. Their mistakes became our lessons. Their observations became our science. Their perseverance became our inheritance. So the next time you hear about an epidemic in history, remember that behind every statistic were real people who laughed, dreamed, loved their families, feared the unknown, and fought to survive with the limited knowledge they possessed. They were not powerless victims of history. They were determined survivors whose resilience changed the future of humanity forever. The story of ancient epidemics is ultimately not a story about death. It is a story about life. It is the story of people who refused to surrender, civilizations that continued rebuilding after unimaginable loss, and generations whose wisdom gradually transformed fear into knowledge. Their journey reminds us that while diseases may challenge humanity, the human spirit has always been stronger than the darkest moments it has ever faced. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson history has to offer. Empires rise and fall, technologies change, civilizations evolve, but the determination to protect one another, to seek knowledge, and to build a better future has remained constant throughout every age. That enduring spirit is the true reason humanity survived the greatest epidemic diseases of the ancient world, and it continues to guide us even today.